There is an entire generation of people who remember rotary phones, cassette tapes, and the first iPhone launch, and psychologists have never quite known where to place them. If you were born between 1976 and 1985, you fall near the end of Generation X. But you may not feel like a millennial either, even though people keep trying to push you into one of those boxes. You belong to what researchers began calling the Xennial microgeneration. The window is narrow because the historical timing was unusually specific. Something happened during those years that shaped the way this group thinks, connects, works, and adapts. And from a psychological perspective, it is worth examining. You began life in an analog world. Boredom was something you simply had to sit with. Phone numbers lived in your memory. If you missed your favorite television show, there was no replay button waiting for you. It was just gone. Then, just as you were moving into adulthood, the world became digital. Not slowly enough to feel seamless, but quickly enough to transform nearly every part of daily life. That timing had consequences that are still unfolding. Most generations grow up mainly inside one technological reality. Xennials experienced two radically different worlds while they were still discovering who they were. Your teenage years looked nothing like your 20s, and the distance between those two stages felt far greater than a single decade. Think about what that meant in everyday life. You passed handwritten notes in class. You had conversations that vanished the moment they ended. You made plans without being able to text, "I'm running late," or ask, "Where are you?" You showed up at the agreed time and simply trusted that your friends would be there. That required a kind of commitment and trust that feels less common now. Then, in your 20s, everyone started carrying cell phones. You moved from Friendster to MySpace, and then Facebook. Before social media, most people had only a few ways to reach someone: call their home, call their workplace, or knock on their door. Suddenly, there were countless platforms, inboxes, passwords, and messaging apps, and you learned how to use them. Because this transition happened during your formative years, you absorbed both systems. Research on brain development suggests that the prefrontal cortex, which helps us plan, adapt, regulate behavior, and learn complex skills, continues maturing well into the 20s. That means many Xennials were still inside a highly adaptable stage of development when the technological landscape was completely rebuilt. You were young enough for new technology to feel intuitive, but old enough to clearly remember the world it replaced. Gen X can sometimes approach digital technology with caution because much of it arrived after they were already adults. Younger millennials have little meaningful memory of life without the internet. Xennials stand between them, with a kind of cultural bilingualism that is surprisingly rare. You can hold a face-to-face conversation without reaching for your phone every 30 seconds, yet learning new software usually does not frighten you. You remember what it felt like to be genuinely unreachable for hours. Many younger people have never experienced that freedom. At the same time, you are generally not intimidated by technology in the way some older adults can be. This balance affects you in subtle ways, including how you think about privacy. You grew up in a world where embarrassing moments could fade instead of remaining permanently searchable. That terrible haircut, awkward breakup, or reckless night at a party may survive in someone's story, but probably not in 100 tagged photographs. This gave you a fundamentally different relationship with your past. Your memories were allowed to evolve. They could soften, change shape, or become stories, which is how human memory naturally works. Research on autobiographical memory shows that personal recollection is not a perfect recording. The brain reconstructs experiences, preserving what feels meaningful while allowing other details to disappear. When almost everything is photographed, uploaded, and archived, that natural process becomes more complicated. The past no longer lives only inside memory. It can return through a search result, an old profile, or a notification reminding you of something you had already outgrown. But technology was not the only major transition shaping this microgeneration. Many Xennials were building careers around the 2008 financial crisis. Economic instability arrived during the exact stage when you were expected to find secure work, buy a home, and establish an adult life. That timing matters. Research on financial hardship suggests that economic trauma during early adulthood can leave lasting psychological effects. People who experience layoffs, debt, or prolonged insecurity during these years often carry the emotional lessons forward, even after their circumstances improve. It can shape how you think about money, stability, and risk. So this is a generation that learned to adapt to enormous technological change, then got economically burned while trying to build a secure future. You know how to navigate uncertainty because you had no other choice. But beneath that flexibility, there may still be a quiet fear asking, what if everything falls apart again? Few people talk about this combination. Conversations about generations often divide everyone into Gen X or Millennials, as though people born across several decades shared the same childhood. But birth years matter most during periods of rapid change. A small difference in timing can create a completely different experience of technology, culture, family life, and work. Xennials carry a paradox that is difficult to fit into a clean label. You may have inherited the independence and skepticism associated with Gen X because you grew up before constant supervision became normal. Your parents often did not know exactly where you were, and nobody considered that unusual. You learned to solve problems, entertain yourself, and tolerate frustration without immediate adult intervention. But you also entered adulthood during the optimistic early internet era when technology still seemed destined to connect people and solve problems. This was before we fully understood that the same tools could increase distraction, comparison, loneliness, and anxiety. It is a strange position to occupy, independent yet collaborative, skeptical yet hopeful, digitally capable yet deeply shaped by analog life. What may define Xennials most is the ability to hold these contradictions without feeling that one side must cancel the other. You remember both the before and the after, so you can see what was gained and what was lost. You may not romanticize the past completely because you genuinely appreciate modern convenience, but unlike people who never knew the earlier world, you understand what disappeared. We lost the ability to become unreachable without making a deliberate effort. We lost some of the patience that comes from waiting. We lost a certain kind of presence that existed when there was not always another screen, message, or notification competing for attention. At the same time, we gained access to people, information, and possibilities our younger selves could never have imagined. Both things can be true. Progress can improve life while quietly taking something from it. If you are a Xennial, you may have spent years feeling as though you never completely belonged anywhere, too young for certain Gen X references, but too old for many millennial experiences. You were caught between two worlds. That is not a flaw in your identity. It is the defining feature of it. In a world changing faster than anyone can predict, living through one massive transition may have given you an unusually valuable skill. You learned that the environment that raised you does not have to be the environment you live in forever. You can enter a new reality, learn its rules, and still remember who you were before it arrived. That is why the Xennial experience deserves attention. Not because this generation is superior, but because it lived through a rare historical moment that taught a lesson the rest of us are still trying to understand: how to adapt without losing yourself in the process. If this resonated with you, let me know what part of the Xennial experience feels most familiar. And if you enjoy exploring the hidden psychology behind everyday life, like the video and subscribe to the channel. Your support genuinely helps me keep making content like this. I also have more videos waiting for you, different subjects, but the same psychological depth. Choose the one that speaks to you, and I'll see you there.